Morning all. Let's continue looking now at Geller against Fischer in the Curacao tournament of 1962. A very strong candidates tournament in which the players had to play each other 4 times each. So Geller, just as a reminder, was a Soviet chess player and world-class grandmaster at his peak. He won the Soviet Championship twice in 1955 and 79 and was a candidate for the World Championship on 6 occasions: 1953, 56, 62, 65, 68 and 71. He won 4 Ukrainian Championship titles in 1950, 57, 58 and 59 and shared first in the 1991 World Seniors Championship, winning the title outright in 1992. He was also a coach to world champions Boris Spassky and Anatoly, and he was also an author. So if Fischer had played Karpov in 1975, he'll be up against Karpov and in the background Geller as Karpov's coach, which is quite interesting to consider. So here Geller kicked off with e4. So in round 2, Fischer had already been defeated at the hands of a local customer, Benko. And was he going to get onto the scoreboard with this game? Well, he played the Sicilian defence, and Geller replied with knight f3. We have an open Sicilian, a6, and now we see bishop e2. And actually this bishop e2 is a kind of favourite of Geller, and you can see the influence actually on Karpov as well. This is one of Karpov's favourite moves, bishop e2. Quite modest move, just preparing, it seems, just the castle kingside. Let's see. So e5 is played in response. So not accepting a kind of Scheveningen setup, but kicking that knight with e5. Knight b3, bishop e7. So Fischer has accepted a structural defect, the d5 hole, the Bolzewski hole, that's sometimes known. So both sides now castling. Bishop e3, queen c7. Okay. And here, white is interested in clamping down black's b5. You might think, well, hold on a sec, wasn't b5 just playable just then till the queen c7? Let's have a quick look. In live book, actually, b5 is a very rarely played move. The top move is bishop e6, 1250 games. The second most popular, 40 games with knight bd7. Knight c6 is 29 games, and queen c7 is 29 games. If we just have a quick check if b5 is palatable here. Well, it has been played before in games, so I'm not sure there's an immediate refutation or anything, but a4 might be a good move, securing white with a small advantage here, according to live book. So okay, so Fischer's move was queen c7, and seemingly allowing the clamp down on b5, but also this pawn could end up going to a5 to sort of mark out b6. So we see bishop e6, knight bishop e6, a5, clamping down on b6, and now threatening perhaps bishop b6, which could be a useful move potentially. Black now plays knight bd7, and now we get a very interesting structural transformation. These bishops were not really interested in somehow weakening black on d5. For example, this bishop sometimes in some variations of the Sicilian goes to g5 and tries to take on f6 to try and weaken black's control of d5. But this is not the plan here. Nevertheless, there's another plan available for white for a structural transformation, making use of the queen actually on c7 as a tempo gainer for this plan. White plays knight d5, and black doesn't perhaps want to lose the dark squared bishop. Something with queen d8, or maybe even stronger, just to play queen d3 here, or rook a4. But I think taking might actually not be such a big deal on e7 here. That's okay there. But queen d3, and this is slightly uncomfortable for black. But Fischer actually takes this knight. He takes it with his knight, not the bishop. So he's maintaining his light square bishop. Let's see if he takes with the bishop. He takes. There is some vulnerabilities on the light square as a result of losing that light square bishop, which might be exploitable at some point in the future. So it seems to keep the light square bishop is more important. So knight takes d5, he takes, and bishop f5. But now we see the move c4, and it's apparent here that white potentially is going to have some passed pawns. If he can get in c5, this pawn will be quite dangerous. Can he get these pawns going, basically? Black plays bishop g6 as though there's an interest potentially in f5, f4 at some point. But we see rook c1, and there's immediate kind of pressure for c5. This knight's holding the a5 pawn for the moment against the queen, affording this move, rook c1. And Fischer blockades now with knight c5, which may just be a slight inaccuracy, because it is giving white this potentially passed d pawn, even though it's easily blockadable, it seems. But was this actually necessary to allow an exchange on c5? Let's take a moment here to consider. If Fischer had played rook ac8, the brakes are still kept surely on c5 here, and this should be absolutely okay for black. Just keeping marking out c5. c5 is really not playable. For example, let's just try it here. Black could just take, and there's no real compensation or anything. The way Fischer played it is quite structurally committal. Fischer actually played knight c5. So after knight takes c5 here, d takes c5. Well, possibly Fischer had been annoyed from his first game, because this looks like not such a strong structural decision to have this past d pawn, because at the moment also a5 is inhibiting natural things like b6 or even b5 later. This is potential problem clamping down on black's queen side, which means in turn actually b4 could be very useful to white here, and indeed b4 is played here. So an immediate consequence, if taking, then bishop b6, protecting the a5 pawn, and these pawns are really evidently ready to roll here in this position. Maybe c5 even straight away may be playable, or queen b3 just keeping the pressure on. So that starts to look quite unpleasant already, that position, if taking. So Fischer's actually under real pressure when just earlier he could have just kept a break on c5. So here he's now having to keep some blockades going. So the blockade on c5 is kept going with rook ac8. But now we see queen b3. So white is threatening just to take on c5 and maybe take on b7 now. So we see bishop d6. Okay, now in this position, does this actually work, taking on b7, or is it a5 too loose? Let's have a quick look. If b takes c5 was played, takes. Now queen takes b7. Is it giving black too much counterplay, or maybe just queen a5 or rook b8? This might actually be playable for white, according to my engines here. This might be okay for white, but okay, black's clearly got some counterplay. It makes the position quite hard to play though, even though white's a bit of material up here. So he didn't go in for that. Geller didn't go in for that. He actually played in this position rook f d1. Okay, and the pressure caps on here, and it introduces new possibilities after taking for d6 with this rook supporting the d5 pawn. So it's not as sharp, forcing as bc, but still it's making b take c5 potentially a little bit more effective before committing to it. So we see here now white's advantage growing a little bit. Fischer under pressure, he plays actually the move queen e7, Okay, so for queen e7, what is going on here? How does it prevent potential d6s, like we've just mentioned? Let's have a quick look. If b takes c5, which was played, well, this was played anyway, b takes c5, so no need to have a quick look. Bishop takes c5. White did play bishop takes c5 here. Rook takes c5. So the question here, is d6 at all useful, or is black absolutely okay? If d6 had been played, it wasn't. But maybe queen d7, and okay, white's still quite a comfortable position, in fact, here. Okay, so rook takes c5. We see actually rook a1, just dealing with that a5 pawn for the moment. So keeping this potential going of d6, but at the right moment. Rook d8. And now, I believe this is for me, this feels like a very, very suave move, which is instructive, very instructive for this particular pawn structure, to put more pressure on black, in particular the b7 backward pawn in black's position. A very instructive, Karpovian-like move, you could call it. Can you guess what Ð² played in this position? If I give you 10 seconds, starting from now. Okay, Ð² played rook a4. I think this is quite a magnificent move to double on b7, and it forces a real concession from Fischer to get a very passive bishop now to try and defend this poor b7. Fischer played bishop f5, condemning his bishop to c8 now after rook b4, bishop c8. And you might think, well, was that really needed? It looks a very passive position now for black. Was it really needed? How else to deal with rook b4 as the imminent threat? If, say, rook cc8, rook b4, there's a technical move here actually. This would be a blunder in this position. Actually, this is a cheapo trap from an engine. Rook c8. If rook b4 here, can you spot the blunder? Why this would be a blunder? Black to play if I gave you 10 seconds here. Okay, bishop c2. Ouch. Okay, so this is not how to play the position as white. This is how to lose the position as white. But no, white doesn't have to play rook b4 here. So even though that's indirectly defending against rook b4 very cleverly with this tactic, what can white do here? He's still structurally got pressure. He can play queen b2, just getting out of the way for now rook b4 to be renewed as a threat without this annoying bishop c2, without it being terminal anyway. So okay, so that's a very technical solution to play rook c8 here. It is actually a playable move, but maybe white can just continue calmly with queen b2 to prepare rook b4 here. But in the game, okay, we see the committal bishop f5 condemning the bishop to c8. So what could be the problem with this idea as well? Doesn't that mean that the backward pawn is of no significance? And this pawn seems to be of no significance because black's got significant blockade on d6 here. These pawns seem frozen, and white doesn't have the dark square bishop to chase away the blockaders from the dark squares. So how does white break through here? Well, in this position, Ð² played actually rook b6. So he's offering a5, it seems here, but he's trying to lift the blockade with d6, surely. So if rook takes a5 was played, d6, queen d7, and now a move striking at the dark squares, queen c3, could be very useful. So like this, trying to lift the blockades again, like this, and this could be starting to be quite significantly a lot of pressure on black here. Bishop d5, it starts to be a real menace, and look at this position, it's just very, very passive. Concretely, white can continue with rook b1, to put the pressure on b7 again. So taking the a5 pawn might not be too appetizing here, because it really fundamentally allows d6 and black's going to be quite squashed. Fischer just wanted to keep his blockades going. He plays rook d6, not going for that a5 pawn. And then we see the move queen b4, putting pressure on the dark square blockades. Queen c7, and now it takes on d6. Queen takes d6, and so far it seems black's holding the fort. Rook b1. What's the immediate threat? There doesn't appear to be any immediate threats, apart from the sneaky queen a4 heading for e8 at some point, but it also means rook b6 is made available. So we see queen c7, and in fact this is now played, this sneaky queen a4. So the back row needs to be sorted out. Bishop or stopped from the queen coming to e8, so bishop d7. But now, a very, very interesting move. The bishop's just come off b7, so that did serve a useful purpose in that position. So this backward pawn is making black suffer tactically to defend his king there. So it wasn't seemingly significant in its own right. It's only after queen a4 that was a very difficult position for black. You might think, well, was there any alternative here to bishop d7? Yes, the engine suggests king f8. This might be holding the fort a lot longer, or a little bit longer, because it seems rook b6 is strong anyway in this position. Aiming for d6 now, and queen b4 is dangerous. This position starts to look a little bit dangerous. For example, if queen e7, d6, and now we've got d7 coming up, and if queen d7, queen b4, where is this rook going? If rook c6 takes, we've got a problem with the king on f8 here, which can be exploited like this. So this starts to get a bit nasty. So there are some technical difficulties which have occurred just with this simple move queen a4. It seems to stamp white with a significant advantage here, this queen a4. So back to the game, bishop d7, and now queen a3, these subtle probing moves. White's now threatening rook takes b7, crashing through rook takes b7, and queen takes c5, and these pawns will be magnified for their passed pawn potential. It's here, actually, that Fischer commits now to rook takes a5. And this basically is the exchange of the last pair of rooks, which means the blockades on these pawns have been lifted, because it was the rooks providing most of the blockading work. We see actually rook takes b7 here, so forcing off basically an exchange of rooks. Fischer plays queen takes b7, we see queen takes a5, so it's clear now white has two connected passed pawns in the centre. This is very, very dangerous and marks more than a clear advantage for white. So this is like purely a strategic win, battling against blockades. But it seems at one point in this game, the very technical move queen a4 is the straw that broke the camel's back to get to this very clearly advantageous position. But still, white still has to win this. The threat now queen d8 is parried with g6. Okay, so we see now h3, so this bishop doesn't have to nanny the white king. Check, king h2. And actually, technically, something's gone wrong here, actually, because it seems about equal now. Maybe it seems there might have been a blunder there. Pardon me. Let me just check this again. So in this position after g6, h3, check. Okay, pardon me. Is this position? Geller had played king h2, and it seems natural. That seems the whole point of playing h3. Something strange about this position, though. It seems the engine is really crying out for bishop f1, not king h2. On bishop f1, white's actually threatening queen takes a6, queen d8, Those are the two principal threats. It seems that King h2 gives black an opportunity here to play either Queen c2 or Queen b2, where Queen c2 is the stronger move. So what's the point of this? Attacking this bishop, and if bishop f3 we can take on c4 here and go for a perpetual check. I think that's the point. Offer the bishop here and go for the perpetual check with check. So that's a perpetual there. White doesn't really want to give up the bishop here to queen takes f3. So that's very interesting, that actually the move Queen c2 might be in a very, very good chance for Fischer to equalise this position, apparently. So that is a very important loose bishop issue. So double attacking on c4 as well. So what could white actually do here? If he plays Queen e1, it just looks too passive. Maybe just a5, and these pawns are not going anywhere. So, okay, so Queen c2 does appear to be a very accurate move, which may have held the balance in this position, despite the glorification of the central passed pawns. It seems, in practice here, after Queen c2, what can white actually do to try and win this position? It seems quite tricky. So, okay, but Fischer played actually bishop f5. And just with this little slip up, white seems to be in the driving seat. Again, there's some strong moves available here. We can rule out Queen c2 now just by playing Queen c3, getting behind the passed pawns. Maybe even d6, threatening quite dangerous things as well. But Queen c3 was played, this extinguishes Queen c2. Okay, so maybe... Okay, a slight weakness there, that if Fischer had really implicitly rejected a kind of drawing opportunity by playing Queen c2, that's the kind of thing that was given to Fischer as a strength and weakness, that sometimes he would go for a win and risk losing. If that really is the case, that he's rejected Queen c2 here, then okay, this looks like quite a dangerous position now, because black's more ideally placed his pieces behind the passed pawns. He plays now Queen e4. So, okay, attacking the bishop. The bishop moves to f3. But now there's a key difference. This queen is protecting the bishop, so there's g3s on Queen f4 check here. If Queen f4 check, we can just kick the queen with g3 and continue with our passed pawns. So now we've really got this ideal position behind the passed pawns. We see Queen d4 now, and okay, what else could Fischer have played here? These passed pawns are quite dangerous now. So Queen d4 goes into this ending after Queen takes, e takes, where now it seems c5 is quite appetizing, or g4 then c5, just kick the bishop first. The bishop was actually kicked, bishop c8, and now c5. So white is threatening just c6, d6 and d7, for example. Fischer played a5. Now we see c6. The king tries to come to the rescue with king f8. But with this move, it seems Fischer actually resigned this position. So let's have a look. It has to be d6 has to be played now, because otherwise black's going to get the new blockade, and that's going to be end of white, because black's going to have the outside passed pawn. So d6 is a mandatory move here. d6, and if we play a4, what's the point? It cannot be d7. I think black can just sacrifice the bishop. Let's have a quick look. d7 takes king e7. Okay, this still might be okay for white, just about. White has an advantage here, but there's an even stronger move in this position. c7, where white is now threatening bishop c6 and d7, and the king cannot get involved here. If the king tries to get involved in this position with king e8, it doesn't help, because we have this pin here to exploit with c8, so that doesn't help. So the threat here is actually bishop c6. That's a huge, gigantic threat. Let's try d3 in this position. Bishop c6, d2. Unfortunately, bishop takes a4 is an evil move which stops d1. And black's in real trouble now. Now the king can start mopping up this pawn as well. So technically this has reached a lost ending, it seems. If we just rewind a bit, that after bishop f3, queen d4, we have a lost ending, where there seems to be apparently an opportunity that this game needn't have been lost from this inaccuracy that was played here, king h2, which allowed queen c2. It seems if white wanted to win this, he had to play bishop f1 here, and although this is going into a pin, and it seems quite dangerous to invite this pin, it's here, d6, and if we go for this pin here, d7, and this may remind you of a recent Magnus Carlsen victory against Boris, where he had to sacrifice a whole bishop to get his passed pawns going. But here is an analogous case where it doesn't matter if black's winning this bishop, his pawn is queening. So that was the way to win this position, it seems, to play bishop f1 and invite the loss of the bishop to try and finally get these pawns queening here. Bishop f5 just doesn't stand up to d6. Take it from that again, bishop d3. Even king h2 is quite strong, but d7 is crushing. There's just no time. Bishop takes f1. We just queen with check. So that was the way to win it. So an inaccuracy here, king h2. You might think, well, it just followed logically from h3, but it's actually an inaccuracy to seemingly follow with king h2, because now queen c2 could have been played, and that really puts the brakes on white's pawns because of the perpetual check possibilities. After bishop f3, queen takes c4. Well, that loses that pawn. But what else does white do here? If he sacrifices the bishop like this, it's really, I don't think it's good enough here. They're a bit too slow. We can get this perpetual check scenario potentially, like check, like this. So there was one way of winning this, but it seemed a bit counterintuitive to go into the pin deliberately with bishop f1. But it's the blockading piece which is winning the material here for bishop f5 to d3, which means these passed pawns crash through. So, but Fischer, he wasn't quite resourceful enough in this game to hold the balance, and maybe he over pushed it, so he ended up getting a bad endgame scenario. Okay, comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.